At 10 a.m. on February 12, 1908, 6 teams stood ready to start the grandest race in automotive history. The competitors lined up in Times Square, New York, prepared to embark on a 22,000-mile race around the world. The great New York to Paris race was about to begin. Hello and welcome to Anything History. On that cold February morning, as the international team of 6 set to race, a crowd of over 250,000 people gathered in Times Square to see the start of the race. They would see the beginning of the most extraordinary expedition of their time, a 17,800-mile overland automotive race westward from New York City to Paris, France. The race was sponsored by 2 newspapers, the French Le Matin and the New York Times. The prize was a 1,400-pound trophy, and above all to prove that such a motorized folly could indeed be accomplished. For some perspective, the world in 1908 was much different than it is today. No Westerner had yet reached the North or South Poles, airplanes only had a few miles of range, and the fastest ship took almost a week to go from Europe to the United States. The world was a rougher and more difficult place to travel than today. At the time, there were few road maps. The roads were unpaved, and there were no roads in some places. The teams had to endure sub-freezing temperatures, snow, and loads of mud along the way. The terrain conditions were rough on cars not designed for such abuse. The teams carried essential supplies with them. This included food, gasoline, chains, ropes, and spare parts. Each team also had mechanics on board to deal with any breakdowns along the route. The race organizers only took a few months to propose a route that would leave New York heading west, cross from America to Asia via the Bering Strait, reach Russia, then Germany, and finally Le Matin's office in Paris. Only 2,200 miles of the entire race was meant to involve transport by boat or train. The cars were to be driven over 17,800 miles over roads, railways, trails, paths, and open fields. The teams were made up of 6 cars from 4 nations: the United States, Germany, France, and Italy. France fielded 3 teams, the Dion, the Motoblock, and the Naudin. The Italian team fielded a Zust, the German team a Protos, and the American team used a Thomas Flyer. Although these cars represented the pinnacle of automotive design at the time, they had very little in common with modern cars, lacking seat belts, heaters, and even roofs. Most of these cars were open-top, and the riders were exposed to the elements. The French Naudin was the first car to drop out of the race on the way to Chicago. As the cars headed north and then west, they took the brunt of February Midwestern winter, facing blizzards out of Chicago and Indiana, and then prolific mud in Iowa. This was the condition over the entire state of Iowa and the eastern part of Nebraska. The second casualty was the French car Motoblock, whose team shipped their broken car from Omaha to San Francisco, ultimately disqualifying them from the race. Weather-beaten and chilled by the intense cold, the Americans steered their Thomas Flyer into Omaha, 3 days ahead of the German Zust and the French de Dion. On hearing that some of the other teams were using rail cars, the American team determined to drive to San Francisco. Continuing on to Wyoming, Utah, and then to San Francisco, the Thomas Flyer made it on March 24th, 42 days after leaving New York City. The Thomas Flyer had a lead in the race when it reached San Francisco. A ship took the car to Alaska as planned to cross the Bering Strait, but once there, it became evident to the team that it would be impossible to cross the strait. The race was rerouted across the Pacific Ocean to Japan. The Thomas Flyer had to return to Seattle and then took a ship to reach Japan and then on to Vladivostok, Russia. While still in Idaho, the German team driving the Protos made a fateful decision. They decided to ship the Protos by rail to Seattle, then cross the Pacific directly to Vladivostok to catch up. For the use of the train, the team was penalized 15 days, while the American team and the Thomas Flyer were given a 15-day allocation for the time lost going to Alaska. The French de Dion and the Italian Zust took a steamer from Seattle to Japan, and during that trip, the French de Dion withdrew from the race. All of the cars remaining arrived at Vladivostok, and by that time there were only 3 cars left in the race: the Zust, the Protos, and the Thomas Flyer. As the teams made their way deeper into Central Asia during April and May, the Italians drew farther behind, and the competition was now between the German and the American teams. After struggling to navigate the muddy roads of East Asia, the Russian authorities advised the drivers to drive along the Trans-Siberian Railway. The contest between the German and American teams turned into a genuine race, both teams overtaking each other for first place despite the delays crossing into Russia. However, when the teams entered Western Europe, with its better roads and no significant delays, the German Protos maintained its lead and entered Paris at 6 a.m. on the morning of July 26th. A delegation from the French newspaper Le Matin greeted them with great enthusiasm. Despite the German team's entry into Paris, the American team in Berlin knew they still had a few days to reach the French capital in order to win the race. The American Thomas Flyer entered Paris at 8 p.m. 4 days later on July 30th, 5 months after leaving New York City. Even though the Protos had arrived 4 days earlier, it had a penalty of 15 days. That's why the Americans became the official winners of the New York to Paris race of 1908. As a bit of a footnote, the Italians did not give up and arrived in Paris on September 17th. The New York to Paris race captured the imagination of the world in the age of discovery. The 6 teams that started the race struggled with blizzards, sandstorms, an unsuccessful attempt to cross the Alaskan frontier, crossing the Pacific Ocean, and the long, remarkable contest through Asia and Europe. This race, among others, paved the way for automobiles to be considered more than just a novelty. It was a clear demonstration of the reliability and capability of the automobile. Today you can find the Thomas Flyer in the National Automotive Museum in Reno, Nevada. It underwent an extensive restoration to return it to how it looked during the Great Race. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel out.